He noticed the resemblance on a Tuesday night. It had been an ordinary, tiring day, one of those days when the silence of the house seems to weigh more than the noise of the world outside. Daniel was in the living room, with his mug of coffee still half full, when he heard a car engine slowing down outside the window. Out of habit, she slightly parted the curtain, without any expectation whatsoever. It was just another ordinary late afternoon, on a street where almost nothing ever happened. The new neighbor got out of a black car carrying a single suitcase, and for a moment Daniel thought he was looking in a mirror. The yellowish light from the lamppost cut across the man's face at angles that were all too familiar. Same height, same scar near the eyebrow, the same tired, sunken eyes, as if plagued by the same kind of insomnia. Even the way he shifted his weight onto one leg while closing the car door was identical. Daniel held his breath without realizing it. For a few seconds he had the strange feeling that the world had stopped. But mirrors don't wave back. And that man waved. He raised his hand slowly, a simple, almost automatic gesture, as if greeting someone he had known for a long time. Daniel took a second longer to answer, his arm heavy, his heart beating a little faster than normal. When the curtain fell back into place, he was left alone with an uneasy certainty. This was no mere resemblance. It was as if someone had copied his face and placed it on the house next door. In the following days, Daniel watched him from the window. He told himself it was just curiosity, that anyone would do the same with a new neighbor. But there was something about the way the man moved that held him there, hidden behind the glass, holding his breath so as not to make a sound, even inside his own house. The man moved in the same way, the same posture when locking the door, the same gesture of scratching his neck when he thought, the same habit of pausing for a moment before turning the key, as if he always doubted whether he had locked it properly. Sometimes Daniel felt like he was watching a recording of himself, played back with a slight delay. Daniel laughed at first. What a coincidence. He spoke loudly, just to hear something break the silence of the room. He tried to go back to books, to TV, to anything else, but his eyes kept returning to the window, as if there were an invisible magnet stuck there. On the first night, he even found his own paranoia amusing. On Monday, he realized he already knew by heart the time his neighbor turned off the kitchen light, until he saw his neighbor watering the same plants, in the same order, wearing the college t-shirt that Daniel thought he had lost. He stood motionless, his fingers gripping the windowsill until it hurt. The t-shirt was identical, not just similar. The same faded shade, the same tear near the hem, the same small ink stain near the chest, and the sequence of the plants, the larger pot near the wall, then the small cracked ceramic pot, and finally the tiny plant near the sidewalk, followed exactly the automatic habit that Daniel had had for years, without ever having told anyone about it. A thin line of cold ran down the back of his neck. That night he dreamed that he woke up in the wrong house. The nights became restless. The clock seemed to tick at different, slower times each time the sky darkened. Whenever Daniel turned off the lights, he saw movement behind the curtains. A shadow crossed the next room, a figure stopped in front of the window, as if it knew exactly where he would be looking. He began to avoid his own reflection, turning off the TV, turning mirrors around, any surface that could reflect him back to himself. But somehow I kept feeling like I was being watched, inside and out. One night he whispered, "Who are you?" The phrase slipped out without planning, almost like a thought that decided to use its mouth. Outside, the silence lasted far too long. The neighbor looked up and whispered the same words back. The intonation, the pause between words, even the slight tremor at the end of the sentence, exactly the same. For a moment, Daniel thought the sound was coming from the street, but it wasn't. The sound was coming from inside Daniel's room. It was as if the walls had reflected the phrase back from somewhere else, an echo that respected no distance. The air became heavy, dense, difficult to draw into the lungs. Daniel turned his head slowly, feeling every muscle in the back of his neck protest. For a moment, he was afraid to look at any surface that might reflect anything. He barely slept that night. He walked through the house in silence, checking locks, pushing windows, turning lights on and off. Everything was in its place, and yet nothing seemed quite right. A cup that he was sure he had left in the sink was back on the table. The curtain, which was normally closed, was now slightly open, as if someone had peeked through the crack. The constant feeling was the same. There was another pair of footsteps living there. Daniel broke into the house next door. The door was unlocked. The simple click of the doorknob echoed too loudly in the silent hallway. For a second, he thought about turning back, but the impulse that had brought him there was stronger than his fear. He pushed the door open carefully. expecting a creak, an attack, anything, but found only the muffled sound of his own heart. The house smelled of coffee, dust, and something too familiar to explain. Same furniture, same photos on the wall, except they all showed only one man, him. Each painting seemed like a record of a life he didn't remember living. Daniel sat on a sofa that wasn't his, leaning against a wall he didn't recognize, smiling in a way he didn't remember learning. The angles of the photos were strange. Some looked like they were taken from inside Daniel's own house, others from impossible viewpoints, as if someone had photographed through the walls. He approached a picture frame and even touched the glass, as if he needed to feel that face to believe it was still his own. On the table, an envelope with the words, "You moved first," written on it. The letters were simple and firm, as if whoever wrote them was in no hurry. The sentence sounded like both an accusation and a statement of fact at the same time. Daniel felt his stomach churn as his fingers hesitated before opening the envelope. For some reason, he had the feeling that, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. Still, he tore the paper flap. Inside, a key identical to yours. And a note. "I left because you wouldn't stop staring at me." The handwriting was eerily similar to his. The curve of the P, the way the period was pressed, everything reminded me of old lists, notes left on the refrigerator, forgotten annotations in old notebooks. Daniel reread the sentence more than once, trying to find some mistake, some proof that it was a bad joke. But all he found was the uncomfortable feeling of being, for the first time, on the wrong side of the mirror. Police later discovered that there was only one registered resident on the street, Daniel Reed. No recent lease, no other name, no history of moving into the house next door. According to the papers, it had been listed as vacant for months. Neighbors swore they saw two identical men, but the cameras only showed one figure walking between the two houses at night. A silhouette passing from one door to another, always at the same times in the same early mornings, sometimes with a suitcase in hand, sometimes with nothing, just empty hands and a slightly tilted head, as if listening to someone no one else could hear. The report called it a psychological breakdown. Technical, cold words, lined up in reports that attempted to fit the inexplicable into known diagnoses. For the doctors, it was yet another case of prolonged stress, loneliness, and possible dissociation. For the neighborhood, it became hallway gossip, hurried whispers about the man who could see himself on the other side of the street. But no paper, no theory, no statistic was enough to convince Daniel. He knew what he had seen, or worse, he knew what he was still seeing. Daniel calls it something else, because every night through the window, the man from the house next door still waves back. Sometimes he tries to ignore it, close the curtains early, turn off the lights, pretend not to notice the faint glow coming from the other side of the glass. But all it takes is a moment of carelessness, a crack in the eye, a quick movement of the hand, and there he is, the same still silhouette, the same slow gesture of raising his arm as if to say, "I'm still here." And the worst part is the strange feeling that if he doesn't respond, something on the other side will get even closer. Perhaps some mirrors are not made of glass. Perhaps some mirrors reside on parallel walls next to each other's doors or in aligned windows. Perhaps some mirrors reflect not only what you are, but what you could have been if you had chosen a different path, a different life, a different way out. Daniel learned this too late. Now, the boundary between him and the other is so thin that sometimes he wonders which of the two, after all, is a reflection of whom. If you enjoyed discovering what's behind the veil, subscribe, and remember, not every reflection wants to be found. Some prefer to stay where they've always been, on the other side, waiting for the moment when you'll stare for too long and wave back without realizing it.